Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by Thomas Schueneman, a multimedia climate content producer, environmental journalist, and founder of several long running climate communication platforms, including PlanetWatch Group and globalwarmingisreal.com. Thomas has spent years reporting on climate science, environmental policy, and the economic and social forces shaping sustainability decisions. His work spans journalism, storytelling, and public education, giving him a wide lens on how climate information spreads, how narratives influence action, and where communication still falls short. Thomas, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, you run several climate focused media platforms. What originally motivated you to step into environmental journalism? And if you could tell us, how has your mission evolved over time?
So my main influence when I was a kid was my father, who worked in environmental protection issues with the federal government and the state of Ohio, but mostly with the federal government here in the United States. And we went camping all the time when I was a young lad in Colorado and a little bit here in California. So that was the germ. I was actually trained when I went to college, was trained as a musician and audio engineer. And but I was always interested in storytelling, and the environment, as I just mentioned. And long about in the 90s, I read Al Gore's book and read a book by Jeremy Rifkin. I think it was called Hot House Earth. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. But that started me thinking about climate change. And so I got more interested in it, learned more about it. And then in 2005, 2006, I launched globalwarmingisreal.com, which has evolved quite a bit since then, and also got a job with triplepundit.com as a writer and reporter, which allowed me to talk to all sorts of people, scientists and policymakers and entrepreneurs. And as an independent journalist, I covered COP15 in Copenhagen and COP21 in Paris, where the Paris Agreement was signed. So it was basically a path of just curiosity that led me to this, and wanting to find a way to communicate my concern about the environment and global warming. And so here we are.
That gives great context. Many people enter this space out of curiosity and then decide to stay.
Yes, I've stayed.
Exactly. The same from my end. Now let's talk about PlanetWatch Group. So PlanetWatch Group focuses on restoring human and planetary health together. Where do you see the biggest misconceptions about the connection between ecology and the economy?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is this idea that it's either or, that if we do something to help the environment, we're going to hurt the economy, or even vice versa. The economy has to be subsumed within the environment. It is part of the environment. It's not apart from the environment. So I think there's a big misunderstanding there. I'm not saying that there won't be economic ramifications by addressing climate change, but if it's much worse trying to ignore climate change and the environmental issues that we face because we think it's going to save the economy is totally misguided. I believe that the impact on the economy, we're going to destroy the economy. Destroying the environment will destroy the economy, basically. It's not either or, it's both and. We need to have both. We need to have an economy that supports the human thriving, and we obviously need to have an environment for human thriving. So that's a big misconception there.
And just as we discussed earlier, everything is interconnected.
And
So
yes.
without strong economy, that creates surplus, and then we can, for example, reinvest it into combating the climate change. It won't be possible. And the same if the climate doesn't allow, for example, for a good and productive agriculture, then economy goes down, there is no surplus, and we cannot
Yes.
reinvest into new technologies. So once
Exactly.
again, everything is interconnected.
Yes.
The same about human beings and the planet
Yeah.
Earth, at
Yeah.
least for now. You often confront climate misinformation. Which types of misinformation do you think are creating the biggest barriers today?
Well, right now, from somebody that's talking from the United States, I would say the president of the United States calling climate change a hoax is right now one of the biggest problems we have in misinformation. Beyond Donald Trump, common misinformation is that, well, I guess Donald Trump says it's not real, or misinformation. It's right, but some of these things like the climate has always been changing. Of course, that's true. That's undeniable. But that gives the idea that the climate change that we're witnessing now is natural. And what we need to understand is that human activity is accelerating climate beyond anything that's natural. Climate is not weather. People often will look outside and see snow on the ground and think that climate change is a hoax because the president said so. Understanding the difference between climate and weather. Weather is what we get, climate's what we expect. The problem with climate change is we don't know what to expect anymore. It's getting harder to gauge what will happen, 100-year floods happening every year. So, the idea that climate is just weather variation. I had one guy that kept telling me that. So that's one area of misinformation. I just think that, well, I think I said it mostly the Donald Trump calling climate change a hoax is the biggest thing right now in my mind.
Mhm.
Because when you have a world leader saying that, that idea is gonna spread, and people are just going to listen to these wacko climate people and say, "Well, our president says it's a hoax, so I'm not gonna worry about it." I think that's a big problem right now. It's
And
kind of a long-winded
unfortunately,
answer. Sorry about that.
once a misleading narrative spreads, correcting it requires much more time and effort than preventing it.
Yes, indeed. It's much harder to redo some, it's much easier to undo something than it is to do it. So once you've undone, this calling it a hoax, what progress we've made in communicating about climate change, it can be undone by one person in a position like the US president saying it's a hoax. You've lost a lot of ground right there.
Mm. Plus, climate change, you mentioned it's not the weather, yes, 100%, but it translates into more extreme and severe weather, unpredictable, right? So you can
Yes,
see
yes,
more drafts, more fires, for example, in California. The same in Canada. We've never been experienced that before. And the last few summers, we had the days with air quality worse than in China because of wildfires, and then floods, for instance, in Europe.
yeah, yeah.
The globalwarmingisrael.com has been active since 2006. Which topics consistently capture the most interest from your audience?
I think solutions, as people are looking for solutions, it's so easy to fall into this doom and gloom. And I admit that if you looked at some of the articles I've written or my writers have written for Global Warming is Real, there is some doom and gloom there because, well, I mean, that's reality. But people want solutions, and people respond to ways what companies are doing, what they can do, and commentary. Some of the more not authentic, that's more personal type of writing. People respond to that because that's where you connecting with people one on one, coming down to a human level. People respond to that, and that's where you can actually have a conversation instead of a diatribe.
And probably it's a positive shift because it means less PR, less greenwashing, and
Yes,
more actionable solutions.
yes, definitely. Yeah. Just a general awareness and concern about climate change. So that is a hopeful sign that, I don't get nearly, just anecdotally, I don't get nearly as many. I was just talking about some of the comments I get, but I don't get nearly as many nasty comments as I used to. So I do think, from the research I've done, Yale does a lot of good research on public perception, Yale University, and just my own anecdotal experience means that I think there's more awareness about climate change, which is a good thing.
Yeah, at least some positive factor. That's interesting because that shift toward wanting actionable information is something that we see among our readers as well.
Yes, yes.
Now,
That's a
yeah,
I'm sorry. You go ahead.
sorry. Now I wanted
Mhm.
to, yes, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, people are looking for actionable solutions as opposed to, doom and gloom all the time.
Yes, exactly. So globalwarmingisreal.com has been active since 2006. Which topics consistently capture the most interest from your audience?
Well, I just mentioned one, solutions. People like to hear about solutions. I had met with globalwarmingisreal.com. It's a mix of solutions and I don't wanna say doom and gloom, but just reality. And some of the other just commentary, telling stories, trying to relate to people, on a one-to-one basis, like, "This is my experience," and trying to connect with people as opposed to trying to lecture people, trying to make a connection. I think those are the types of themes and subjects that my readers respond to. But they're definitely looking for solutions. They hear about climate change, and unlike perhaps you and me, we're in the space, we're doing this every day, and so we think everybody is as enmeshed in the issue as we are, and they're not. Understandably, they have their lives, they're raising families, they're pursuing careers, and they can't just always be worried about climate change. So when you give people a sense of hope, even even with this very existential issue, and there are many reasons to be concerned, profoundly concerned, but offering people a sense of hope, and maybe just through human connection, I think is very important. That's one of the problems with climate change. With talking about climate change, is tends to, if you're not careful, it will break down that human connection. People just, well, we're talking about silos. People go off into their own little silos and they lose touch with the fact that we're all in this together, really, as
That
a human
says a lot
species.
about what people still struggle with or feel uncertain about when it comes to climate information, indeed. You place strong emphasis on storytelling. So, what makes a climate story actually resonate without overwhelming people?
Um, Again, not relying too much on facts and figures. While they are important, I don't think people respond as well to just, parts per million, things like that. It's good to know about, but I think what resonates with people is finding common ground. And one of the areas of common ground I've found, like people that wouldn't want to talk about climate change, or don't think it's, real, or take it politically. For conservatives in the United States, I've talked with many of them, and where I can find the common ground is a lot of these people are outdoors people. They like to hunt and fish. They want a good. I mean, how many people really want to trash the environment? I don't think that's what people want to do. So if you find a way to talk about actually, what I found recently is the best way to talk about climate change and global warming is, if you possibly can, don't even bring it up. Don't even use those words. Find another way to talk. You like to hunt, you like to fish, things like so. We want to preserve the environment, and a lot of these people, they're out in the environment and they can see the changes. So when you try not to, climate change is real. That doesn't resonate. I think finding finding the human connection and the common ground, and I think I've just said it. A lot people want a healthy environment. They want an environment where their children can thrive, and so when we talk about that and not go right to global warming, parts per million, that's going to turn people off. Does that make sense?
Yes, to be honest, I really like examples that you gave, fishing or hunting, because bringing concepts down to the human scale, I think that will pull people back into the conversation.
And I think that was well put, bringing it down to a human level. I think that's what happens a lot of times. It gets up here in this, abstract, like I was just parts per million and level of sea level rise, and those things, while they're critical, I'm not dismissing that. But as far as connecting with people, yeah, it has to be at a human level.
Hmm? Human level plus something that actually concerns them. Like if somebody loves fishing or hunting, environment will be jeopardized. They won't be able to do it anymore.
Right.
That will speak louder.
Yes, indeed.
So you work with scientists, policymakers, businesses, and the general public. Where do you see the biggest communication gaps between these groups?
As we mentioned before, I think this is where the silo effect comes in. The scientists, like I mentioned, there was the one scientist who was pleading for journalists to help tell the story. So I think that's a gap. The scientists, they know the facts, but they don't know how to communicate the facts to the general public. I mean, that's a pretty general statement. Some scientists are better than others. Companies need to be transparent. I think one of the problems with some of the private sector communication is it sounds more like PR than actual concern for the triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. I think companies need to be aware of their social license to operate, and so I think where the gaps are is in the silos. I think companies need to be more aware of um, science-based policy making in their internal affairs, and not just take it as a PR. And when they do claim something like we're reducing our emissions by this much, prove it. Don't just say it, show
Exactly.
us, be transparent. And another, I'm really sorry about my voice.
That's okay.
Blame shifting. I do believe that sometimes consumers are expected to take the blame for more systemic problems. Recycling is important, but let's be real. At least here in the United States, recycling is not all it's cracked up to be. So I do believe that you need to recycle. If you don't recycle, you're bad. That sort of blame shifting is not helpful. And the fact is that while I encourage everybody to do recycle as much as they can, how about if the companies thought about the life cycle of their products a little bit more, didn't package everything to the nth degree, use less plastic. I don't know. These are some of the things. I think it gets really to the silo effect, the lack of a overall arching holistic perspective. And I think a lot of things get lost in those gaps between the silos.
Also, all the examples that you gave, in my view, this is under one term greenwashing, which brings more wrong than good to helping the environment
Yeah,
100%. So
greenwashing
that's,
and green hushing.
yes. Instead of focusing on real solutions and how to help the environment, companies tend to only take care of their PR, which
Yes,
probably translates into them bottom line and profits.
yes. Well said.
Thank you. So, in a noisy information environment, which is sustainability and environment sector, 100%, what approaches help keep audiences engaged with evidence-based content?
Well, I think staying engaged with content, sometimes that means backing off, going outside for a walk. But beyond that, let me put it this way. There's a book that I highly recommend, and maybe you've heard of it, The Ministry of the Future.
Well, I've heard about it, but
Yeah.
didn't read yet.
I recommend it because I believe that it is by Kim Stanley Robinson, and it really encompasses it starts out. I won't give it away too much, but it starts out with an enormous heat wave in India, and then it goes from there. And how the idea is the Ministry of the Future is a UN agency, and throughout the book they present all the potential solutions: economic, environmental, social. I mean, they really cover everything. So I think, like, finding a book like Ministry of the Future is a great way to be engaged. I do believe it's excellently researched book. I think actually storytelling fiction, sometimes fiction is a great way, the right kind of fiction, ministry of the future, but other reliable, just find a reliable source that resonates with your, the style, what you're looking for. Other, the Conversation is a great website. Inside Climate News is a great for just more straight ahead, fact based, but well researched and well written content. So I think staying engaged is not allowing yourself to become overwhelmed, and that's just general, the doom scrolling. We live in an age where there's just a lot of angst and a lot of recrimination, and I'm talking from the United States, so that's what I'm seeing here.
But in many cases, we can extrapolate onto other countries, developed
Yeah,
countries.
yeah, yeah. I don't want to, it's interesting coming from the US, even though I've traveled, I've been around many places, but in the US, I think it's people in the US really have to make an effort to get their head out of the United States and realize that there's the rest of the world out there. I think that's a problem. And again, I think one of the things to stay engaged with the issue, I've given some potential sources of information. Of course, globalwarmingisreal.com. But maintaining a sense of gratitude. I mentioned going outside for a walk, understanding that there is still an abundantly beautiful world and being grateful for it. I think that can empower us to maintain a healthy attitude when we try to think about and address the issue.
Again, I really like the example of going for a walk because it is a good reminder that clarity and consistency still matters more than complexity. Going back to the book you recommended, we'll include it in the references so our audience can easily access it.
Yes, definitely recommend the book.
Thank you so much for that. And now, in your view, which climate or sustainability issue is not receiving the attention it deserves right now?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind right now, and you might not think about it as a climate issue, but it is, and that's AI. It's a growing concern, and I will admit up front, I do use some AI tools for research and some brainstorming, and it's hard not to. As an independent content creator, if you're not using some of these AI tools, you're getting left in the dust. That said, um, the enormous resource requirements, electricity and water for this AI, I think that isn't being addressed, at least not to the point, not to the extent that it needs to be. I mean, I would suggest that we cool our jets a little bit with rolling out AI, which of course isn't going to happen. I mean, the company, all these companies are just going whole hog on it. But I do think that we need to think about the impact of the AI. And also, a lot of these data centers are being built in, lower income neighborhoods, and it's really impacting the data centers are impacting the surrounding communities as well as the resource use. So I really think we need to think about that. And another issue that is, again, not straight ahead climate change, but it's plastic. It does have climate impacts, but and there is conversation around plastic, but I think that it might not be understood the enormity of the problem that, especially single use plastic. I think that's a real issue we have to come around, which kind of leads into the idea of circularity, the circular economy. When I was a kid, I'm old enough, I can remember back in the 1960s when I lived in Colorado when I was a kid, we had this little box on our front porch. We put our empty milk bottles in it. The milkman would come by, take the glass bottles, put fresh milk in. We had circularity back 50, whatever, so years ago, and we've kind of lost that idea. So I think that is definitely just a environmental sustainability and climate issue is the linear economy is unsustainable. We have to start thinking of more circularity.
So personally, in my household, I'm trying to switch as much as I can, as many products as I can from plastic to glass containers. The same about water bottles. Of course, it's a little bit more expensive, but still. At the end of the day, also, I'm not consuming microplastics, but whenever I can, I'm replacing plastic with glasses. And also going back to your first example, I hear a lot counter arguments regarding AI, but because companies can always claim, for example, in the US, yes, if we'll not go full speed with AI, then, for example, China or
Yeah,
another
yeah,
country will get there first.
yeah,
That's why we need to be like at the head of the competition. So there
yeah,
is
yeah,
always need to be a balance.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. If we don't do it, but interesting though, that argument doesn't seem to in the U.S. doesn't seem to hold sway with renewable energy, and
Yes,
you know,
exactly. Right now, the Chinese government is the leader, I think, as
yeah,
far as solar panels, wind energy is concerned.
yeah. And it's important. I think another thing that it's important to people to realize, because at least in the U.S. we hear from from our government that how unreliable and expensive renewable energy is, and that's not so much the case anymore. I mean, a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I believe in the US and perhaps globally, most of new electrical generation capacity is coming from renewable energy sources. It's not that there's no silver bullet. It's not that there are issues with renewable energy. Lithium batteries have environmental impacts, but you know,
Environmental and social impacts.
yeah, yes, the mining and
Exactly.
but to just it's a thriving industry here in the US, and Donald Trump is trying to pull the rug out from under it. That just makes no sense to me.
Now, many of our listeners works inside companies trying to communicate sustainability in a practical way. So, what habits would make internal and external communication more effective in your view?
Well, I talked about transparency before. Sustainability, it's hard to not say that word, but sometimes, like with climate change, sustainability is almost become overused. I think that's a really good question. And it's a very, I do believe it gets back to what we've said throughout this conversation is trying to meet people where they are. I think companies need to communicate that they are taking real responsibility for the impact of their operations. They need to be transparent and not assume that the public is going to buy everything they say. Let me give you an example. I tried for a little bit. I don't want to throw a company under the bus, but it's a company called Factor, and you get their meal. They send the meals to you. You get these and it would come. We tried it for a little bit. Huge packaging with all this plastic stuff that kept it cool. And I actually called the company, said it would be great if I could just send this material back to you so you could reuse it. And they said, no, you can take it. If you can't recycle it, you can go to a recycling center. And they were just kind of putting the responsibility on the consumer. So I think there needs to be shared responsibility. And I think that companies need to communicate that they are serious about taking the responsibility. Everybody has responsibility. It's not that consumers are absolved of their consumption habits, but a lot of times the consumer is kind of stuck. Like say if you want to retail, not using Amazon is like a challenge. Okay, I'm not going to use Amazon. I don't know if this is making sense, but I do think that internally companies need to take seriously and communicate their internal to their staff and their workforce that they are serious about environmental stewardship and their social license to operate and the triple bottom line. And when they do that, then their workforce can incorporate that and help spread that idea. So these are just some of the things. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but those are some of the things that come to mind.
No, I think it's very true because a lot of companies would benefit from applying very basic principles before thinking about bigger communication strategies, for instance.
Yeah. And another thing, just generally, and this is not necessarily aimed at companies, but people like me, communicators in this space, and I think I touched on this before, and it's to not lecture people, to not because I care about climate change and you don't, I'm better than you. That sort of idea is, or again, it gets back to meeting people where they are, and I think a lot of times that doesn't happen. Our people are talking at each other instead of with each other, and so I think if we get more of a let's have a conversation. I might not agree with what you're saying, but let's talk about it without getting heated. And I think these are very important ways that we can communicate.
So again, we are circling back to communication. Communication is
Yes,
always the key.
communication. Yeah. Communication is key, you know?
Mhm. I have one more additional question that just popped into my head during this call because you've been monitoring the industry for a long time. So, what is your stance on nuclear power plants? Because, for example, in Germany, they switched off the nuclear power plants, claiming that, of course, there can be some accidents. Although, if it's a modern technology, modern plant, it shouldn't happen. But still, some people argue that the negative impact on environment is very low with nuclear power plants. And at the moment, whenever Germany needs more power, they switched on additional coal factories, which obviously produce a lot of negative elements into the atmosphere. So, what's your stance on nuclear power?
So I'm a little ambivalent about nuclear power plants, but that might be because I can remember Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. I remember the accidents we've had and how serious they were, and the continuing impacts, I think, around Chernobyl. That said, um, technology is not what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it might be a longer term. The thing about nuclear power, my understanding of it is it takes a long time to get a plant online. I've heard like up to a decade. So I think down the line, if we start rolling out as safe nuclear energy plants as possible, that could be part of the solution later in the century, though we have to get started on that now. We also have to figure out what we're going to do with the waste. Um, my one issue I would have with it is that we need to start reducing emissions like yesterday. And developing nuclear is not going to help us reduce we need to reduce as quickly as quickly as we can, and nuclear is not going to new nuclear anyway is not going to address that issue. So that would be my concern. I think focusing our resources on solar and wind, geothermal, tidal, things that can be developed quicker and we get faster results are what we should focus on right now. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at nuclear. I just don't think it's the issue we should be focused, the solution we should be focused on shouldn't be a priority right now, is my opinion. And we
Thank you
really
very
do
much.
have to figure out what we're going to do with the nuclear waste.
Exactly. Maybe it's, send it to the space.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we wrap up, is there anything important that we didn't cover or anything you want to highlight for people, let's say, working in sustainability or following climate news?
Well, I think people that are in sustainability, keep at it. You know, always work on how you communicate with people. You know, these are challenging times. COP30 just ended. It was kind of disappointment. So it's really easy for some people to, give up hope. There is always hope. Like we've said before, if you're feeling down or feeling stressed or feeling anxious about life, go outside. There's there's a natural world out there, and that would be my one big takeaway. We should put down our phones. We should go outside. Everybody, let's all go outside and revel in this beautiful world that we have, and think about all there is to save.
Thanks for adding that. It's always helpful to hear what stands out from your perspective after the full discussion. Thomas, thanks again for joining us today. Your insights across journalism, science communication, and climate storytelling offer a clear picture of how information shapes decision making today. So, for everyone listening, this conversation will be available on netzerocompare.com on YouTube and on all major podcast platforms. If you want structured, factual guidance on sustainability, emissions, and regulations, visit netzerocompare.com. Thomas, once again, it was great having you here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this conversation.